Sports Talk on Wednesday, April 30th, 2025. Um, Today, we are going over our reactions to the draft. Not a ton, just a few, just to sprinkle in some takeaways. And Justin has compiled a list of research for us uh, as to the correlation between the transfer portal and the draft. So, without further ado, Justin, you're here.
Yeah. Yeah,
Well,
so that's the big question we're going to answer today is, does entering the transfer portal lead to, is the transfer portal the path to the draft? That's the big question. I think it's becoming a popular move, and we'll see what the numbers show. With that, Matt, go ahead and give the people what we're about.
yeah. So here at Updog Sports Talk, we pride ourselves on representing not just the big takeaways and the big teams and big players, but we like to focus on everybody. We like to give as much recognition, and I think during our draft special and simultaneously during ESPN's draft stuff, that kind of reared its head. Mel Kiper Jr. Kind of lost it during the draft, where we hardly even talked about Shador Sanders. I mean, we brought him up a couple times, but we didn't dwell on it. We wanted to give those kids their moment of glory, like their moment getting drafted into the NFL. So um, we pride ourselves on representing the little guy also. Hence the ECU hat that you see on Justin's head and the Texas State hat that I have on. Um,
Yeah, that's a nice Texas State hat, Matt.
yeah. Uh, Wonder who gave it to me. Uh, Justin and I will find deals randomly, what like Marshalls or uh, TJ Maxx or Burlington or whatever, and then we'll be like, "Hey, this is $5. You want it?" And then if the other person doesn't answer, we just assume it's a yes, so we just go ahead and get it. Um, but yeah, that's who we are here at Updog Sports Talk. Sit back, relax, and enjoy our takeaways. So, Justin, why don't you tell me your biggest takeaway of the draft?
Mine was I think, we saw a few surprises. We saw a few quarterbacks drop. Um, I think there are some things that surprised some people but didn't surprise us. I think actually I don't remember how your mock looked, Matt, but I was able to correctly predict safeties dropping in the draft. I think the pick I'm most proud of is getting Malachi Starks to the Ravens. Um, But yeah, I think, Matt, you can go over a few of your takeaways before we really get in the meat of this draft talk.
So it appeared over the last few years that the Falcons um, didn't really care about the draft picks too much. They signed a veteran aging quarterback to a 4 year deal while simultaneously drafting a quarterback in the top 10. Um, but this year they did the exact opposite. They went heavy on defensive line. And I think that's kind of what stood out to me is the Falcons taking two edge rushers in the first round.
Yeah.
Um, I do also like the fact that they got Xavier Watts. I think that he can be back there with Jesse Bates and wreck some havoc. Um, I think another big takeaway is other than Mason Graham, what the heck were the Browns doing? Um,
I don't know. I liked a lot of their picks.
I liked
I
a
liked the
few of
running
them.
backs they took. I think both of them were very good in their spots, helping them kind of revamp the backfield because, I think unfortunately Nick Chubb's injury is cutting his career a bit short of what it could have been. And Harold Fannin is going to be a dog for them. That was a huge pick. And I think I like a few of the guys they added on the defensive side as well.
Um, Shout to Mr. First Down commenting in. He had previously told us that he was going to the draft, and he just chimed in saying that he cared about his draft picks. So I would too if I got Cam Ward. I mean, just right there, Cam Ward was able to solidify the Titans as a solid draft, uh, having a solid draft. One thing that I did notice is the Bengals reached on a few players after the first round. So Shamar Stewart, not a bad pick. He was the best defensive end available and one of the top players available at the time, so it made sense for them to take him. Um, is he the first choice? No. Abdul Carter was actually my first choice, but I don't think the Bengals could have
Well, you
moved
were
up that
never
far.
going to get him. Be realistic, Matt.
but but I mean, Shamar Stewart has the intangibles to be a really good defensive end in the NFL. And I was watching a bit of Up and Adams, Kay Adams show on FanDuel Sports Network or FanDuel Live or whatever, one of the FanDuel things. And Luke Kuechly was on there talking about the Bengals getting Stewart and saying Carter and Stewart are very different types of players. Carter plays more of an outside linebacker rushing, whereas Shamar Stewart is a very prototypical defensive end on a defense. And Al Golden had mentioned that um, when Notre Dame was game planning for Texas A&M, they weren't really game planning a whole lot for Nick Scorton. Their eyes were on Shamar Stewart. So I think it's good that they got a college defensive coordinator who recognizes the talent coming out of these schools because I think that the
Yeah.
Bengals can do well. But when you look at the second round pick, South Carolina linebacker, I forget his name. But pairing that,
Hang on. I just remembered I have the whole draft list up. So, um, Demetrius Knight
yeah,
he was at South Carolina by way of Charlotte and Georgia Tech. So he was. I'll give you this hint right now. I'll throw this nugget out here. He was one of the few two-time transfers taken in the NFL draft.
and Justin will
Um,
kind of break down a lot of that here in a minute. But um, the second round, third round, and fourth round picks were really good by the Bengals. They were needs that the team needed, or players that the team needed in certain spots. But I think all three of them were slight reaches. And I think a lot of analysts agree, and I think the Bengals might agree, but they were just like, you know what, screw it, let's just take these guys. So I did like what the Bengals did in the draft, but Justin, the biggest surprise to me was Green Bay Packers actually took a wide receiver in the first round.
Seriously, I still cannot believe it. We even before we had this podcast, like we used to do mock drafts as a competition against each other for fun during draft season. This is how much we love draft season, by the way. It's really like a combination of both of our worlds of college football and NFL. And we used to even before we did this podcast, we used to compete each other trying to get the best mock draft. And we tried for several years to mock a receiver to the Packers to the point where I think 2 to 3 years ago we finally gave up on it. We were like, they're stubborn, they're never going to do it. And then this year it finally happens.
I mean, honestly, I don't know who else they could have taken other than a receiver. I think it receiver's the biggest need, and the receiving core isn't bad, but when you have three number twos or two number twos and a number three, like
Yeah.
it starts
But
to weigh down the team.
again, though, we've been thinking this for years. We have
Yeah,
been thinking this for at least like, I mean, obviously they had Devonte Adams for a little bit, so that was fine. But as soon as Adams was gone, like we have been saying, they have desperately needed a number one receiver. But we got to the point where we were like, they're going to ignore this need.
yeah.
But then they finally didn't, and I fully expect them to go defense. There's many defensive players on the board they could have taken, and I would not have been surprised by it. But shout out to them making a good move here, giving themselves a receiver that could potentially put them over the top.
Well, what do you think about the Bills? What like
I'm
how do you
I'm
feel
actually
about it?
pretty happy with the Bills draft. Harrison just by all accounts seems like a cool dude. Like I absolutely, I didn't know a ton about him because Kentucky's one of those programs in that weird spot for us where they're like in a big conference, but they weren't doing great. So they're a little gap a bit in our coverage, to be honest. So I didn't know a ton about him, but man, when I saw he was dapping up every player drafted before him, I was like, this dude's Buffalo Bills all the way. I
Yeah.
freaking love this pick now.
Yeah.
And then, the turnaround in the second round, get TJ Sanders who can help on the inside. Finally, don't have that midseason run when the Bills can't stop the run. That'll be nice. And then, Landon Jackson was someone that people even talked about going at the end of the first round. I actually would not have been surprised if he went to the Packers at 23 and the Bills ended up getting him in the third round. So I was really thrilled with that pick. I think the mid round was pretty decent. They did a fine job there. Took some chances there. Um, throughout some ideas. I think what the Bills are kind of learning is with Josh Allen, like you can really hide a lot of the weaknesses on your offense, but when you're going against Mahomes in the playoffs, you can't hide the weaknesses on your defense. And that has been what has cost them year after year. And it was very apparent they wanted to fix that. So, I'm glad they took the chances on that and, went ahead and really addressed a lot of needs the defensive side of the ball is needed. Um, let's hope it works out. That's the next step. We
Yeah.
can say what we want here in general. Like I typically don't comment specifically on certain prospects because let's see how these guys do in the NFL when they get there. Um, but I think the positions they went after were good positions.
Now, Justin, we didn't actually plan on bringing this part up, but I have had a few people ask me what my opinion was on it. So I figured now would be a good time to bring it up. Few people asked me why I thought that so many quarterbacks fell, and I think it was a combination of a few things. So for certain prospects, it was bad advice. I think Shador got really bad advice. I think if he would have just thrown at the combine, whether it was as long as it wasn't absolutely terrible, I honestly think that he probably could have set his floor at third round. But because he
Yeah,
didn't throw at all and decided to just tell scouts to check the tape, I don't think he did every drill for the pro day either. So I think when it comes down to Shador, it was just he got bad advice to um, stand pat. And when you stand pat against the entire NFL, they're going to blackball you to a certain extent. So I think he has the talent to succeed in the NFL, but I think it was a lesson to future prospects. Like, hey, just do what you got to do. Like, no one's guaranteed. Um,
absolutely.
so that's my thing on the whole Shador thing. Now, some other quarterbacks, I think Jackson Dart was an appropriate range. Um, I think that Dylan Gabriel probably could have gone a little higher, um, but some of the quarterbacks were slipping because of team needs. By the time you got to through a few rounds, everybody kind of knows the first four rounds are people that you really try to have long term. Um,
Right.
and if you feel like you have more holes than just quarterback, then a quarterback's not really going to fix it. So if you can take that same guy 3 rounds later, then why not? You know. So I
Yeah, and
think
they
that
were all falling, so why not?
yeah, I think a few GMs who were like, "Oh, we need to watch for a quarterback," saw that the quarterbacks just kept falling, and they're like, "Oh, okay, we can wait." Um, Now the Browns taking two quarterbacks, we'll see how that goes. I don't see. I see either Kenny Pickett or Joe Flacco staying, and the other one getting cut. And then I think between Gabriel and Shador, one's going to be on the team, one's going to be the emergency quarterback, or they'll try to trade for like a fourth round pick next year or something. Um, so the QBs falling is a big point to talk about.
Yeah,
But just
let's not forget here Quinn Ewers. Mentioning him, he was someone that got some real bad advice.
yeah,
You know, he could have gone back to college football, been a star. You know, maybe not for Texas. I think Texas was moving to Arch Manning, but he could have gone back to college football, been a star somewhere. Like some a big program would definitely have taken him, and you know, been a Heisman contender, probably a playoff contender. Definitely would have made more money than he would make. He's making in the NFL now. And say he goes to the draft and ends up a seventh round pick.
yeah. I mean that was a little depressing because I think other than when he was at Ohio State, I really didn't root against him. But he also didn't show first round talent. And I
I
think
think at times he flashed it. Like, you know,
at times, but consistency is
2023
how you
against
get into the first
Alabama.
round.
Yeah, but I mean 2023 against Alabama, like you watch that game back when he tore up the Tide defense, like that was a game where I came away really impressed with him. You know, he kind of did the same against Michigan this year. You know, in the big house, obviously Michigan turned out to not be that great, but you know, Michigan's defense was still fine and Quinn Ewers tore him up. I mean he landed in a good spot because, you know, Miami needed quarterback depth and, you know, they're one unfortunate hit from losing their quarterback because I mean, let's be honest, you know, Tua's situation is a scary one to say the least.
Yeah, I do think they
Um,
got their bang, like a good bang for their buck with Ewers. Um, I also don't think that he's a viable long term option unless is able to learn some things. I think it's going to take some time to get him to that point. And I think watching like a handful of drafts ago, you'll see guys who just kind of ended up being busts. Like when like I think teams really try to do as much homework as they humanly can on quarterbacks specifically because you want that
yeah.
guy on your team for 10, 15 years depending on how old they are. So, um with Ewers falling to the 7th, a little surprising, but at the same time, there were better quarterbacks and it just kind of kept pushing him down.
Yeah, I mean to an extent. I think he was better than some of the quarterbacks that went ahead of him. But by the way, mentioning quarterbacks, let's kind of unless you have another one to talk about, like we can kind of put a bow on this. I'm very interested to see Tommy Malott with the Raiders. Like
Yeah.
he has very good like Taysom Hill, just use him in whatever fun way you want to, kind of potential there.
Yeah, Antoine Randall L kind of vibe where um he didn't really play a whole lot of receiver, but I guess he did pretty well at the pro day. They said that he lined up to do um wide receiver drills for pro day. So it was pretty cool to see him get drafted as a receiver. It did take me a couple days to find that out because I had a couple things going on this weekend. But uh, I mean, they can do a lot with that. You could have him do like a jet motion and then have him throw back the other way. Like
Yeah.
you could do a lot of fun things with him. And even if he pans out as the better quarterback, I mean, too much quarterback depth, I don't think has ever hurt anyone too badly.
Nope, not a problem at all. I mean, we'll see what position they choose to put him at, but because he's really, you know, he reminds me a lot of Taysom Hill, where he can just be that all utility player.
Yeah. So Justin, let's dive a little deeper in the research that you did. So how many players transferred at least once, and did that affect their draft stock at all?
Yeah, so let's just dive into really the numbers here. So of the 257 players that were drafted, 94 of them came from the transfer portal, which that's 37% of the players drafted. Based on like how much you see players go in the portal these days, that number feels low to me. Um,
I think we're gonna see a big uptick in that in the coming drafts. I think the next two drafts are really gonna give us a better, more well-rounded because I think a lot of the players that have been transferring started transferring as freshmen. Um, so I think what we're gonna see is that number just creep up, and it wouldn't surprise me if 2 or 3 years from now that number's above 75%.
we shall see. And then if we go a little bit further, nearly half of these players that transferred, they hit the portal because their coach either got fired or left. So there was actually a pretty specific reason why they left, and I think there's a small correlation here. I think when you're in college, like you're still new to this, you're spending your first year like also learning the scheme. Then you get into year 2, year 3, you're perfecting your craft and everything. That's where you really take off as a player and prove to be like a top player that gets drafted in the NFL. So when these guys keep hitting the portal over and over again, they're not learning a scheme. They're going straight to a new one again, and they're hurting themselves from growing, I think.
So one thing I will add to that particular point is it's not necessarily just the player. I know of a player this offseason that hit the transfer portal because um, he had a shoulder injury, um, kind of aggravated it a little bit, so now it pushed his timeline back. Everything still should be fine for the first week of the season, but the coaching staff told him that he will not make the team, even though a lot of people transferred out, and then he was basically up for the starting job. And because of that, the it wasn't even it wasn't clowning around. It wasn't anything like that. He just kind of aggravated it again, and they were
Mm-hmm.
like, "Well, you're out. We're gonna make sure that you hit the portal and go somewhere nice." So um, there are scenarios out there that go unheard. Like, had I not known somebody that knows this kid, then I probably would have just been like, okay, well, maybe he just wants out. Maybe he just doesn't like the spring, how the spring game turned out for him. But no, it turned out that because of just a small tweak to an already injured shoulder, the coaching staff told him to leave.
Man, it is kind of crazy how it is, um, and just to we have scenarios like that. I will say I did not get to run the numbers in this piece, but a lot of what I noticed was if of these players that did hit the portal, um, they managed to hit it in the way where they were at their new destination also for at least 2 years. That was an important piece as well. And it's hard to tell how many may have hurt their stock by transferring. Like you mentioned Nick Scorton. He was a guy that was extremely productive at Purdue. Went to Texas A&M. His productivity dropped there. He still gets drafted in the second round, but maybe the time taken to learn a scheme could have hurt him a little bit in
Yeah.
his productivity. Maybe he could have gone in the first round if he stayed at Purdue. That's hard to tell because obviously, Purdue was a dumpster fire of a team, so I also don't blame him for leaving. Um, but, it's just kind of unique situations like that. Now, the final number here that I really, really want to pound the drum on guys that transferred 2 times. Guess how many got drafted?
7.
Wait, I told you the number. Yes, only 7 players that drafted twice got drafted. 3 of the 7 were quarterbacks. Cam Ward, who was very much the exception to the rule, it worked out super well for him. We had Dylan Gabriel. He obviously transferred twice. his was potentially a similar situation. I think, Oklahoma kind of told him to leave because they wanted to move forward with Jackson Arnold. Um,
Look how
which
that turned out.
looking at how the offense turned out, I think Dylan Gabriel was pretty happy to have been in Oregon instead.
Yeah.
That offense was a mess last year. And then, of course, every draft analyst's favorite quarterback, Tyler Shuck, was also there. Which, by the way, it was very funny, like how many two-time transfers. I think a lot of them, for some reason, were involved at Oregon at some point, whether
Hold
they
on.
ended
Hold on.
there or yeah,
Before we get too far away from this, because I have ADHD and I will forget. Tyler Shuck, do you want to hear some interesting tidbits on him?
sure.
Did you know that he was childhood friends with Brock Purdy?
No, I actually did not.
Yeah. Did you know that he played baseball with a guy named Cody Bellinger?
No,
Do you know who Cody Bellinger is?
I'm guessing he's a good baseball player.
Yes.
Okay.
Pretty freaking good at what he does. I think he's on the Yankees now, if I'm not mistaken. Came from the Dodgers and then went to either Rangers or Cubs. Can't remember which one. I think it was the Cubs. Um, but they played baseball together and were good childhood friends. Do you know how long Cody Bellinger has been in Major League Baseball?
Maybe a
Eight
long time.
years.
Oh yeah, this is where I can see where this is going
Yeah.
now.
So I mean, he is one of the older on the older side when it comes to draftees, but um, I mean, honestly, what I saw from him at Louisville, he's got a lot of potential.
I think so a little bit. There's not. I'm not
Should have
one
worn
hundred
my Louisville
percent.
hat.
I'm not fully sold on him, but if the Saints need someone besides Spencer Rattler this year, he could do for that. There was the other two-time transfers here. We may as well go over all of them because there's only seven. For one, two of the seven went in the seventh round. One of them was Mr. Irrelevant, Kobe Minor. He ended his career at Memphis. The other one in the seventh round was Ja'Cory Crosby Merritt, which it's kind of hard to call him a two-time transfer because he he came from a Division two or lower rank to New Mexico, did really good at New Mexico, and then went to Arizona, played one game, and then was told he could be potentially ineligible, so Arizona had to take him out. And then they're like, okay, we'll let you know if he's going to be eligible, and then never let them know, so he just had to sit out the whole year. So that
Jeez.
was one case where a two-time transfer definitely hurt him because he ended up having to sit out the whole year because nobody can figure anything out. Um, Trey Amos he originally started at the Louisiana Raging Cajuns, went to Alabama, and then Nick Saban retired, so he went to Ole Miss. And then we had Knight, who we kind of briefly
Yeah.
mentioned before. He left Georgia Tech because Georgia Tech fired their coach, and then he took part in the whole Biff experiment at Charlotte. That wasn't going well, and then he went to South Carolina.
Well, I mean, looking at the top quarterbacks, I can't think of one that actually just stayed with the program the whole time.
Oh, hang on.
Because Riley
Well,
Leonard was a grad transfer. Will Howard transferred from Kansas State. Shador transferred. We'd obviously went over Dylan Gabriel, Cam Ward, Tyler Shuck, Quinn Ewers.
yeah, yeah. Quarterback was very much like the exception to the rule here when it came to transfers. That was very interesting to bring up. So I'll go ahead and pull the numbers real quick. That is 11 of 14 quarterbacks that were drafted had transferred at one point. Jalen Milrow, and then both of the
Forgot
FCS
about him.
quarterbacks that the Raiders took in back-to-back picks, Tommy Millott and Cam Miller, were the other two. So that goes to show you. I wonder how that turned out. Um, one of the weird factors that may have played into that is, you look at the 2021 quarterback recruiting class, and Hang on, let's pull it up real quick.
I think
If you have a point
it's
you want to get out, you can go ahead and do that while I look up the 2021 quarterback recruiting class.
I think it is a little interesting to see um, how often some of these guys are transferring. Now, some of them it did make sense because like you're going from one style to a different style, so you're trying to show scouts that you're versatile. In Cam Ward's case, he went from Incarnate Word to Washington State and then to Miami. So I think he kept going up the ladder when it came to programs. Um, Shador just followed his dad around. Riley Leonard, solid at Duke, really good at Notre Dame. So I think if he just went last year or went or stayed at Duke, I don't think he probably would have had the same draft position. Same with Will Howard. I don't think if he had that playoff run, I don't think he would have been drafted. Um,
Yeah, and you look at it again. Riley Leonard left Duke because partially because Mike Elko went to Texas A&M, and then you also look at Will Howard. He was kind of pushed out for Avery Johnson.
yeah. So it from a quarterback standpoint, it kind of makes sense. Now, um,
Now let's pull up here. So I got it up now. Um, we're gonna look at a couple of years here. The quarterback, the quarterback recruiting rankings, and I think we kind of see where there was a lot of recruiting misses. Now, 2021 starts out fine. We got Quinn Ewers. He did good in college. Caleb Williams, won a Heisman, number one overall pick. Then it gets ugly. You get Sam Heward. He's still working his way around. I actually don't know where he ended up this year in the portal. He originally was at Washington. He went to Cal Poly. He was at Utah. This offseason, I know he was recruited by Incarnate Word, but I don't think he did not land there. I forget who ended up taking him. Number four was Brock Vandegrift. He retired from football after a rough season in Kentucky. Um, we had a good one in J.J. McCarthy. He did good. Kyle McCord obviously was at Ohio State, had a fine year there, was kind of pushed out a little bit, and then had a ton of success at Syracuse. You get Ty Thompson, who wandered around everywhere, never starting. Finally started the bowl game, and everyone saw why he didn't start anywhere. Um, Jake Garcia was our Dingwell Award leader a lot of this year when he finally got his chance. Drake May was good. He did really well. Jackson Dart was number 10. Obviously, had success at Ole Miss. Um, then you get to 2022. 2022 gets a little bit uglier. Sorry, I went to all positions. Cade Klubnik, he's catching on. Connor Wegman, it didn't work out for him at Texas A&M. We're going to see how it goes for him at Houston. Ty Simpson is contending for Alabama's starting job this year, so we'll see. Drew Aller, still at Penn State. That worked out for them.
potential top five pick.
Yeah. Walker Howard, the guy with the infamous Brian Kelly dance.
Infamous.
He infamous. He is now with he's bounced around a little bit. He's with the Louisiana Raging Cajuns. Devin Brown, he we don't really know what he is because every time he's gotten a chance to start, he's gotten hurt in like two plays. Um, Gunnar Stockton, he might be starting at Georgia. Sam Horn has definitely not played yet. Nick Evers, he's wandered around a lot. Brady Allen committed to Purdue, but I don't think he's done anything yet. So you can see here it gets pretty ugly when you're looking at the 2022 recruiting class. And I mean, even 2023 is not looking fantastic outside of, what Arch Manning looks like right now. So I'm wondering, are we seeing more portal quarterback? I did not expect to cover this, by the way, but are we seeing more portal quarterbacks because we're just completely missing on quarterbacks and recruiting rankings?
Yeah, I think recruiting rankings have become so overanalyzed that they're no longer that accurate. I mean, if you look at the last few drafts, one of the top guys in each draft was like a 3 star or less. If you look at who is dominating the NFL right now, Joe Burrow, I think, was a 3 star. Uh, Pat Mahomes was a 3 star. Josh Allen wasn't even a star.
Yeah,
Um, Lamar Jackson, I think, was a 5 star, but like, there's always that exception to the rule. Um, Everybody expects someone to be a generational talent. Like, who's to say that Arch Manning is actually as good as his uncles or his grandpa or as athletic as his dad? Like, who's to say that Texas isn't just loaded that and we haven't even realized it because of the name that is on the back of his jersey? You know, Garrett Nussmeyer. He's rumored to potentially get drafted by the Saints next year because his dad is the offensive coordinator. Um, so it would be kind of funny to see the Saints take him over Arch Manning. um,
that's an interesting one there.
yeah,
Obviously along almost a year out, but the LSU quarterback from in the same area with that is the son of your offensive coordinator versus getting another Manning with the Saints. That's an interesting
that would be a
debate.
tough decision.
Way too early. Yeah.
Because if you get it wrong, everyone's gonna be like, "Dude, you should have taken the other guy." But I think what is happening here is because of I won't say because of transfer portal. I'll say because of NIL. The quality of the top end quarterbacks has dropped a little bit, and because of all the information out there, I think the floor is coming up a little bit, but the ceiling is coming down. So all your quarterbacks are going to be this good or this bad. Whereas back in the day, it was like, I don't know, handful were generational talents, and everybody else was like way down here, and it there was a big disparity between how good one quarterback was over another. But
Yeah.
if you look at this year's QBs, I mean, a lot of them impressed, but I would say none of them really had the same hype that like Cam Newton had when he got drafted, or Tim Tebow, or any of the Browns quarterbacks.
I mean, it's almost what we said. Like there wasn't anyone that's like stuck with the same school and has been like a star consistently for them. There's a lot of guys who some of them were originally just under recruited coming out and then had to make their stardom elsewhere. Um, we saw a lot of guys like that in this draft, or guys who were highly recruited didn't really have their first destination pan out, and then end up having a decent college career elsewhere. But we just didn't have that. I think that's what makes next year's class kind of interesting because your early top three are Arch Manning, Nussmeyer, like you said, and then Drew Aller, who are all guys who are pretty decorated recruits and have stuck with have been with the same school developing this whole time. I'm very interested to see how we look at the quarterback position next year compared to what it was this year. That's for sure.
I think a lot of it does come down to arm talent, but there's a lot of people who can throw the ball, but are just it's just rattling around up here in between the ears. Like, I think what a lot of people are like, what a lot of scouts are looking for is how are these players up here?
Yeah.
Um, can this guy be a leader, or is he just in the spotlight? Like Shador in the spotlight, kind of a leader, but not the leader.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. So I think one of the big takeaways here, when you look at the transfer portal, um, if you're gonna hit the portal as a player, uh, you better be very thoughtful of this decision and choose the correct spot the next time. is your college career is short, and you don't have that much time to make an impression. So
Now,
you transfer a second time, you're putting yourself further behind, and it's going to be more difficult to get to the NFL.
let's zoom out a little bit. There's obviously a big disparity between the top programs and the bottom programs. There's a big difference between Texas and Texas State. Even though we thought Texas State was going to be fantastic last year, if they were to face 10 times, I would say Texas wins 8 or 9 of them. I think that just like any sport, revenue sharing should be turned on. Um, I think if they want the sport,
You worded this like simple as like college football 25. Like, I want to turn on revenue sharing.
uh, I really do. I think revenue sharing would kind of bring some of these bottom feeders up a little bit. Kind of put a New Mexico State on the map. Maybe build their program up. Maybe Bowling Green could add stands in one of the end zones, or suites, and then put stands above that. I think what it could do is make not only college football give it a little bit more parity, but I think it'll just help these players find a spot. Most people right now want to go to Ohio State or Alabama or whoever because they can offer the most money. If you do revenue sharing and cap it at a lower amount, spread that money throughout the country,
Mm-hmm.
you're getting
Yeah,
a lot of these
teams.
players. Like you can make a guy like Josh Allen, who was a no star recruit, into a first round pick, but not have to spend 24 million for him.
Yeah, and teams have to be more selective about how they recruit and stuff. Like Texas can't just go around with their $40 million roster and just go, trying to pluck players from other teams and to build depth. Like that's good for the players because I'm not saying 100% that Texas is lying. I know some of the bigger programs definitely have been. They go around recruiting these kids off of other people's rosters, saying hey, come here, make $1 million. They don't tell the kids that, oh yeah, by the way, you're going to be going up against other kids, that are on our roster already. They already know the playbook, and you don't. You have to figure it out while practicing with the third team at first. All of that kind of stuff. We see it at a lot of different programs where kids are these athletes are off to a great start to a college career at a smaller school. They go to a bigger one, and then they don't get an opportunity, and all of a sudden you know they're looking in a position where they have to hit the portal again just to get themselves back out there.
Yeah, there was a string of years where it seemed um, like a player from, let's say, Ohio State would transfer to Bowling Green, um, just to get some time to get looked at. Now it's the other way around. All the good players from Bowling Green are being poached to programs, maybe not exactly Ohio State, but maybe like Cincinnati or Pitt or kind of that tier of teams, um, so that they can start competing a little bit more because they'll have a deeper roster. And I think that's going to make it tough for the sport. I think it's going to make it kind of unwatchable if everybody's going to the same 5 teams, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. I think
Um,
it's on the way. They need to figure a few things out, but it seems like we're getting close to having a cap on this because let's face it, Texas having their 40 to 50 million dollar roster just is ridiculous.
yeah, I think one of the biggest takeaways from these stats that you compiled is that maybe you just want to transfer one time. I mean, you made a big decision going to school the first time. Now you have a big decision because statistically you only have one more shot at it. Because if you do it a second time, typically that's not going to look good. Like, who's the guy who went from USC to Oregon to Dylan something? Not Gabriel, but you know what I'm talking about? There was a quarterback
USC.
behind Miller Moss and all of them who like came in to USC and then transferred to Oregon, and then now he's at some smaller school. Boys, maybe Malachi Nelson was one of them.
Oh yeah, yeah, Malachi Nelson. He's transferred a couple times. Yeah.
Yeah. So like 5-star quarterbacks are transferring 2 or 3 times now because they keep making a bad decision on where to go or getting outplayed when they get to a roster that they think that they can take over at. And instead of going into a program young, like if I'm a guy like Nelson, I think he was a 5-star recruit coming out, I would have been like, okay, how first of all, how are the receivers? Second of all, how's the line? Third of all, who are the quarterbacks in the room? How old are they? Did you bring in 2 other recruits that are around what I am? Because if you did, I'm looking somewhere else. At least I mean, that's 33-year-old me looking at that. I mean, it's way different when you're 18. You don't really know what's going on, but
Hmm.
logically, it just makes sense to pick a situation where you're gonna get a shot.
Yeah, and I think the other thing they need to look for too is like if you are with a program right now, maybe you're not making the most NIL money, but you're playing well there, you're having success, you like your coaches, the scheme's going well. Don't go chasing what you're being told elsewhere because it may not pay off that well.
Yeah, at the end of the day, these coaches are salesmen, and if you believe what a car salesman tells you, then you're gonna believe what a coach tells you also.
Yeah.
So these coaches care about you to a certain extent, but in their eyes, the team comes first.
Hmm.
No
Yeah,
individual
absolutely.
players above the team. So if they're bringing you in, they're probably looking at least 2 other people in your position.
Yeah. Yeah. Especially the portal because, we're going to continue to see more and more where coaches are just looking to bring guys in from the portal just to use them, either to advance or whatever. But they're bringing them in later on. They're not super invested in their development.
Yeah.
Where you stick with the coach that's recruited you out of high school, you know that they've known you for a long time. They know who you are. You know who they are. They're going to be invested in your development and continue to try to get you to this point here where you're getting drafted in the NFL.
Yeah, the coaches who are actively in the portal maybe are filling some holes, but a lot of those holes aren't really going to be filled in the portal right away. A lot of those holes are going to be depth related holes. Um, Now, Will Howard and Riley Leonard, they came out good with this whole thing. I don't think either one of them would have been drafted had they stayed where they were at and played like they did both of the years before. Um, but both of them went into a really good situation, and both of them went to programs that were wanting to win now.
Yeah.
Um, and it just came down to really the final drive. That touchdown by Howard at the end, when everyone thought it was going to be a run up the gut, that sealed it. The Notre Dame had the momentum in that, so I mean, it really could have
Yeah.
been Riley Leonard going third or fourth round. But one transfer, good. Two transfers, not so good. So thank you, Justin, for coming up with all those stats. Big shout out.
Yeah, it was a thought that hit my mind, and I was like, this is gonna be pretty bold to do this, but and take a lot of time. But I was like, what, I'm gonna try to go for it and see, what comes out. And I was there because like I kind of started to think about it as the draft is going along. I was like, kept seeing guys go off the board. I was like, what, this guy, he was with that program the entire time, and then I keep noticing that. And I was like, what? I'm interested now. I got to run the numbers here and see like just how many guys that were getting drafted did hit the portal after all. I'm sorry, my dog decided to scratch herself but not scratch yourself, but hit the foot on my desk for some reason.
um,
There's not an earthquake. That is just my dog's foot hitting the table.
um, Shifting focus from that, Justin, I know you haven't followed along with this at all, but um, the Pacers move on to the next round in the playoffs after winning a thriller in overtime with a game-winning layup by Halliburton um, to take down Giannis Antetokounmpo and the Bucks. Um, Indy's looking good. I think right now Houston is up big on Golden State. When I looked earlier today, the Heat were losing by a lot to Cleveland. Um, so it looks like the first round of the NBA playoffs is going to be winding down here soon. Um, Pacers look like they're a really hot team, and I think not just because I'm a fan of them, but because like they've done everything in their power to make sure this team can try to beat Boston. And I think that's what's going to happen is they're going to face off against Boston. We'll see how that goes.
Nice.
Um, so NBA playoffs are ramping up. Um, Baseball's about the same. You have any other sports stuff?
No, that's all from my end.
I had one earlier and I forgot what it was. I was like, oh man, this is instead of food, I could just ask him this. I should have just texted you early, because forgot already. Um,
Yeah, that's what I do sometimes. I make sure, like, if a thought comes to mind of what we should cover, I text you to make sure I don't forget it later.
yeah. That is the show today. We don't have any food or ending related questions, but follow us at Updog Sports Talk on every social media. Like, subscribe. We are trying to make our YouTube our main thing. So if you guys are watching on Twitter, feel free to head over to YouTube and give us a sub. That would be much appreciated. Next week, an undisclosed topic that we have yet to plan. So we'll see you guys next time. Catch you later.
Catch you in the flippy flip.